Hi everyone, my name is Cady Carmendy. I'm an instructional coach at Mooresville High School. So welcome to the NCBOLD on-demand version of Sparking Engaging Academic Discourse, which is all about strategies for promoting student talk. So our goal today is to get your students talking more. So there's a couple of ways that you can access my presentation. My presentation does have a lot of resources in it. And places for you to click and interact. Even on this on-demand webinar style, there's still a place for you to communicate with each other. So you can scan that QR code if it's convenient on your phone, or you can also go to the bit.ly, which is bit.ly/NCBOLD, all uppercase, and then Spark Student Talk, all lowercase. So that bit.ly will stay at the top of my presentation for a couple slides, but also feel free to pause the video to take a moment to get to the presentation. So while you're getting to the presentation, I'm going to speak really quickly to our alignment to our digital learning competencies. If you're an educator or honestly even a coach, either way, we're in the collaborator strand. So this session is all about how to get your kids talking. We're also going to collaborate with each other about these ideas. And so we'll try to improve our practice, discover and share resources and ideas, and solve problems as it relates to student discourse in the classroom. And then if you're a coach like me, we're establishing relationships with educators so that we can improve those instructional practice, which this specific instructional practice is student talk, getting your students talking more. And then if you're an educational leader, we're in the empowering leader strand. So leaders create a culture where teachers and learners are empowered to use technology in innovative ways to enrich teaching and learning. We're really going to talk about some digital tools that support some of these strategies and enhance them to get your kids talking more. So the purpose of this session is you're going to get a bunch of research-based strategies and protocols that will help facilitate, provide a little bit more structure to get your kids communicating, collaborating, and really diving into your content. Most of these that I'm going to show you, you're going to be able to use with your content standards. And then last but not least, before we kind of start to get into the meat of this presentation, I do have a note taker. So you're able to print this note taker out or use it digitally if you do want to take notes as we go along throughout our webinar today. So if you click on that note taker, it's going to pop open a new Canva template for you. So make sure you just click use template for new design. You can either print this note taker out or there's a space for you to write right on it digitally. But the way the note taker is laid out is it always allows you to have notes and key takeaways for the strategies that we're going to go over today, and then your ideas for implementing this in your content area. So our outcomes for today, we're still going to have the opportunity, and I'll get to that on this slide in just a moment, of how to collaborate with each other and get more ideas from each other as it relates to academic discourse. Hopefully you gain at least 3, if not more like 5 new strategies that you can use to get your kids talking more. And then we're going to explore digital tools that can support a collaborative classroom in a digital space. And so, especially if you are watching this on demand, this Padlet is where you want to be throughout the presentation. I will direct you to this Padlet multiple times throughout the presentation, and this Padlet is going to be where we have a chance to communicate and collaborate with each other about the strategies that we're exploring. So after we do a particular strategy, I'll direct you back to the Padlet and give you a chance to collaborate that way. All right, so we're diving right into our first strategy. Our first strategy is called Name in Motion. This particular one is the only one where we're not going to actually use content. But the reason why I'm showing you this one first and starting with this one is I call this a low stakes activity, meaning the students don't have to have a lot of content or background knowledge. So when you start with a low stakes activity like this, it kind of just creates a culture that we're in a collaborative space, for one, but for two, it lowers their anxiety a little bit if they just have a space to practice communicating and kind of just like lowers that entry barrier. So this is a great one to start with to just kind of get your kids in the feel of being in a collaborative space. So there's two ways to facilitate this strategy, in-person or digital. I'm going to speak to the in-person one, and then you can actually participate in the digital version if you want to participate in the digital version. If you click on the title, it'll pop open a one-pager, and this one-pager explains the name and motion strategy step by step. So if you forget, want to revisit this idea and don't want to watch the whole webinar again, this one pager is your go-to to help you figure out what this strategy was and give you kind of like a little reminder. All right, so if I were to facilitate this strategy in person, it's important that all kids participate because that's part of the research behind this strategy, that everyone has a moment to say and contribute to the conversation. That way, when we actually go to insert academic content, it's like, hey, anyone can answer these questions. Anyone is participating. So you're going to circle your kids up. If you have a large class, you might want to split your kids into 2 circles, but you're going to circle your kids up. And the first thing that you're going to ask them to do is you're going to ask them to think of a motion that represents them. So if they like to play baseball, maybe their motion is a baseball bat. If they like basketball, maybe they're shooting hoops. If they like to read a book, maybe a book is their motion. If they like to take naps, maybe a nap is their motion. But think of a motion that represents them. So give them a minute or 2 to do that. Then how you facilitate the strategy is you pick a student to go first in the circle, or you can go first as the teacher. And the first person will start. So if I were to start, I would say, hi, I'm Cady Carmendy, and my motion is racing remote control cars. I like to race remote control cars, so this is how I do that. Okay, then I would pass it off to the person to my left. The person to my left cannot say their name and motion until they say mine first. So the person to my left would have to say, hey, she's Cady. She likes to race remote control cars, and then they could give their name and motion. When they pass it off to the next student has to give my name and motion, the person next to me name and motion, and then their name and motion. So by the end of the circle, it gets a little tricky, but the students will really help each other out. I do this with high schoolers all the time. They always participate, love this activity. So don't feel like you have to remember every single little thing. The kids really help each other out. But the research behind this activity, especially if you do it in person, is the motion actually resonates with kids more than the name. So when you go to partner kids up and you ask them to start talking about academic content, even if they don't remember each other's names, they probably remember their motions. And so if a kid gets partnered up with me, they remember, hey, she likes racing remote control cars. So it's a moment for us to connect with that. If they know that I like racing, they can be like, hey, did you win the last time you raced, or something like that. So the motion is really what makes a strategy like that effective. But also because every kid is contributing, again, it kind of sets that stage of like, hey, we're in a collaborative space. So even when I'm asking you to answer a content question, anybody can contribute. We're kind of all in this together. Okay, so a modified version of this is I highly recommend, if you're doing this digital, to do it with a GIF, because as I mentioned, the motion is what resonates with kids the most. So I think it's important that if you do this digitally, that there's some sort of motion still involved. And so if you go to our Padlet, you can actually see what my GIF or GIF, tomato, I don't know if you're team GIF or team GIF. You can actually see what my GIF looks like. And so my motion is still racing, but my GIF is flashing through all of the things that pertain to my racing. If you use a tool like Padlet, you could just have kids search for pre-made GIFs. They don't have to necessarily make their own. So if you use something like Padlet and I want to use racing as my motion, I could just find a racing GIF. I don't necessarily have to make my own. Another good tool for that is Google Slides. Google Slides has the ability for you to insert GIFs or GIFs right in there. So if you don't want them to make their own, you don't have to. But I do have a Canva template linked there. Canva has a free gift maker. So if you do want the kids to be able to customize and make their own, you could always use a program like Canva. It's really super easy to make a gift that way. That's how I made mine. So if you want to go ahead and participate in this one, there's two ways you can participate in this one. You can go ahead and pause the video and make a GIF or GIF, or find a GIF or GIF that represents you, but you're either going to post your name with your GIF that represents your motion, just like my post is, or you can go ahead and start to talk about any reflections that you have on this type of activity. So I mentioned that this is a low stakes activity. The reason why it's great is because it builds that confidence up into students talking more in the classroom. So you can speak to anything. Why do you think an activity like this helps support student discourse when it comes to academic conversation, or how could you use this in your classroom? So two options for contributing, sharing your ideas, or posting your GIF on our Padlet for this one. So if you're going to go ahead and do that, pause the video before we move on to the next strategy. All right, our next strategy, some of you may have heard of this before, just not called Campfire Chat Partners. I chose Campfire Chat Partners because our theme is sparking student talk. Many people call this idea clock partners, but either way, the idea is that kids have a set partner that they know who they're going to go to during turn and talk times. This idea really elevates your turn and talk time and kind of gets them straight to the point of jumping into the content, because when you ask kids to turn and talk and you're like, hey, find a partner, talk to someone about X, Y, and Z, their brain starts to work through all the logistics or anxiety of who am I going to work with, who am I going to talk to, what am I going to say, and their brain starts going through all these things instead of just jumping to thinking straight about the content. If you remove that barrier and they already know who their partner is, who they're going to talk about XYZ, they can immediately start to think about the content without worrying about other external factors. So this idea of clock partners or campfire chat partners can be done throughout a semester for a couple weeks. If you just want to use it as a day of thing, that's okay. So I do have a template here. If I were to have you guys partner up, or had the ability to partner you guys up in an asynchronous setting, I would have you find a s'more partner, a bonfire partner, a camping partner, and a backpack partner. And this would actually be a place for you to record the names of who is your partner. So use this template for a new design if you want to modify it. You could adapt these things to anything that pertains to your content. It would be very cool to do this with content. Like if you're a science teacher, maybe you do lab supplies, like a beaker partner and things like that. So you could really modify that to your content however you see fit. I highly recommend that you either have your kids keep a digital copy of who their partner is, because sometimes they forget. And I know my high schoolers, if I had them put this piece of paper in their book bag, they would lose it. So if you do print it out and use a piece of paper, maybe consider keeping those papers in your classroom somewhere that they could easily go get them and find who their partners are, or keep a digital copy that the kids could just pull up the digital copy and say, hey, oh yeah, my s'more partner is this. The other thing that I want to mention on this slide is I have a bunch of different ways to partner kids up. Sometimes when you ask kids to go find a s'more partner, they want to go straight to their friends or someone who may not be the best collaborative partner. So for that reason, you could use some of these different kind of prompts to try to get them to be more random. So for your s'more partner, find a partner who is not born in the same month as you. Or for your campfire partner, find a partner who has a similar style shoe as you. So if you and someone else are both wearing flip-flops, you guys can partner up. I have more ways to debrief this idea on the next slide. So pros is that it promotes a little bit of movement. If their partner's not sitting immediately next to them, that's not a bad thing. They could just go get up, find their partner, have a quick turn and talk for a minute, and then return to their seats. It does provide some structure and routine. So some cons, as I mentioned, are students picking their own partners. I gave you a way to modify that. Remembering their partners, either keep it digitally or keep it in their classroom. And then, especially if you use this throughout the semester, absent students is a real thing. So what I used to do in my classroom is if there are a bunch of kids absent, I would have a lost and found corner in my classroom. So if your partner wasn't here, you would just go to the lost and found corner and find a new partner, or partner up with me if your partner really wasn't there. So I have a whole bunch of resources on this slide that you can look through. I love this 17 tweaks that make a big difference in group work. This kind of speaks to the idea of kids working together. There's a bunch of great resources there. There's also a way to do this with note cards. I think this is a blog post where a teacher talks about why she didn't love clock partners and what she did to modify it to really make it effective. And then peanut butter jelly partners can be a way that you can do this very quick, like day of. Just say like, hey, step 1, find a peanut butter jelly partner before you pose a content question to them. So all really good resources on that slide. So before we move on to our next strategy, I'm going to stop and direct you to the Padlet again. If you like this idea of campfire partners or clock partners, or already use it in your classroom, or have an idea of how you could use this effectively in your classroom, please share your ideas. Something interesting, something different, something exciting, something advanced. Like I said, maybe you already use it and have found a way to make it effective to get your kids talking more and kind of lowering that anxiety so that they can jump straight into the content. When you have those moments of turn and talk in your classroom, share your ideas on the Padlet. So pause the video now if you want to go ahead and do that. All right, our next strategy is called tic-tac-toe talk. That is a tongue twister. So tic-tac-toe talk just provides a little bit of structure to that turn and talk time with your students. So this is a really good partner activity. So if I were to actually facilitate this with you guys, I would have you partner up and pause the video, and I would give you a couple of minutes to think through some of these questions. What are some strategies or way you get your kids talking in the classroom? What are some of the key indicators to successful academic discourse? Why is student talk important? Etc., etc. So I would give you a couple of minutes to read through those and think about what your answers are. On the next slide, I always provide support resources. So you don't necessarily have to use these resources to answer those questions, but because I'm going to get you talking with your partner and talking a lot, it is potential for you to struggle to find new information the longer I let this protocol go on. So a modification to this strategy is making sure there's some sort of support resource, because if one of the partners gets stuck and can't keep producing new information, there's a support resource that they could go look at and try to offer something new to the conversation. So that's the purpose of this slide. Okay, how the strategy works is when you partner the kids up, step 1 is you have them decide which partner is X and which partner is O. And then I have 2 options for actually playing the tic-tac-toe game. All right, so option 1 is you could use this game template. So this game template is just a Google Slides template. I'm not going to make a copy, but if you want to use it, you should make a copy. I have a million copies of this template already. So you would share this with the kids, and then they would share it between partners. So if I was partnered up with somebody, we would need to be on the same slideshow. The other template that you can use, you'll see why you need this in just a minute, is a digital version of this game. So this is just, there's actually probably several websites that actually do this, but here's an example of one of them. You could play the tic-tac-toe game. Hit start, hit 2 players. If you want to get real crazy with your kids, choose a 5x5 or 7x7 grid, but we're just going to choose 3x3. And then both partners would be on this same game board. So they would only need one computer to use this game board. All right, so now that you know your two options of how you could get the kids to play tic-tac-toe digitally, you could also just have them make a tic-tac-toe board on their paper. They could do it on paper too. All right, so how the strategy works is student X is going to go first, and they're going to try to speak for 1 minute about what they learned about. So in our case, you would speak about any of the questions that I had listed on the previous slide. You could do this at the end of a lesson, though, where you had the kids just trying to retain information about what they learned in a lesson. And so student X just tries to speak for a minute about what they learned. As long as they spoke and offered new information, then they get to put an X on the tic-tac-toe board, whether you use the Google Slides or paper copy, or the game that I showed you is tomato, tomato, but student X gets to put an X on the tic-tac-toe board. Then it switches to student O. Student O has a little bit more of a difficult time because they cannot repeat any information that student X said. So student O also tries to talk for a minute, but if they repeat any information, then they don't get to put an O on the tic-tac-toe board. As long as they offered new information, then they can place their O anywhere on the tic-tac-toe board. And you keep repeating this process in these rounds until someone wins tic-tac-toe, or it's okay. Sometimes tic-tac-toe ends in a cat's game too. That's okay. But what I always do is the more rounds that we go on, I decrease the time because it's going to get more and more difficult to try to keep giving new information. So maybe I'll go down to 30 seconds for round 2. And for round 3, I go down to 15 seconds. You just kind of need to modify the time based on whatever is working for your kids. So like if you have high school kids, they might be able to talk for that full minute. If you have elementary or middle school kids, you might need to start them at 30 seconds and don't start them at a minute and then lower your time from there. But it is a great protocol for sharing the load between the two partners during a turn and talk time in a fun and engaging way because they get to play tic-tac-toe while they're doing it. So I've got some tic-tac-toe timers on slide 14, and I'm also going to pause there and redirect you to the Padlet. So please share your ideas about what you like, pros and cons of tic-tac-toe, how you feel like you can use this in your content area in your classroom. So share your ideas in a post under tic-tac-toe talk. Feel free to go ahead and pause the video right now. All right, next I'm going to offer one more low stakes activity. So whenever you do partner work, especially if you did something like tic-tac-toe talk, it might be a good idea to start with something like 1, 2, 3 clap first before the students do tic-tac-toe talk. You'll see why as I explain the strategy, but the purpose of 1, 2, 3 clap is it creates a culture that mistakes are okay, and it's bound to give the kids a funny moment with each other. And when they have a funny moment with each other, whether they know each other, are friends, not friends, it makes it easier for them to talk to each other about the content once you get to an actual content strategy. So how 1, 2, 3 clap works is you partner the students up, and partner A starts by saying the number 1, partner B says the number 2, partner A says the number 3, and then they just keep starting over again. So if I say 1, 2, I say 3, my partner says 1, I say 2, my partner says 3, and you just keep going back and forth saying 1, 2, 3 with your partner. That round is pretty easy. The kids typically get that. For round 2, they can no longer say the number 1. If they say the number 1, it's a mistake. So they have to clap instead of saying the number 1. So again, if I start, I would clap instead of saying the number 1, and then my partner would say 2, I would say 3, and then hopefully my partner would clap instead of saying the number 1. I would say 2, my partner would say 3. If we make a mistake, we just say ta-da, start over, do it again. And then for the last round, it gets just a little bit more difficult because you can no longer say the number 2 either. So the number 2 is a stomp. So again, if I'm starting, I'm clapping for 1, my partner's stomping for 2, and then I'm saying the number 3. Then my partner would clap, I would stomp, my partner would say the number 3. They're bound to make a mistake or laugh with each other at this point. It is so funny to watch the kids do this. If they do make a mistake, they say ta-da, they fist bump each other, and they just start over again. But doing something like this before jumping into the partner work of talking about academic content, it's like, oh, okay, we just laughed with each other. Now we can talk about science, social studies, ELA, math, etc. All right, so go ahead, take a minute, post on our Padlet one more time about our last kind of low stakes activity that we went over, 1, 2, 3 clap. How could you use it? It's a real easy brain break. Honestly, it doesn't take more than 2 to 3 minutes to do in the classroom if you don't want it to take more than 2 to 3 minutes. So share your ideas about 1, 2, 3 clap. All right, our next strategy is called odd one out. So with any of these strategies, something good to model with your students is to let your students do these strategies with non-content first, just so that they learn the routine and how to talk to each other. And then you can insert content. So if I were to facilitate odd one out with you guys, I would put you in small groups or in pairs, and I would have you try to think through what animal is the odd one out and why. And so each of these animals does have a support resource that you can learn more about them. But your goal in talking with your partner or your small group is to figure out, what would you pick? Would you pick, I think this is a lionfish, a polar bear, a starfish, or a shark? Which one would you say is the odd one out and why? And so it's actually better to do this activity with something where there's not an obvious answer, because that's what's going to get your kids talking more. If there's not an obvious right or wrong answer, then they keep pondering and wondering which one is the odd one out. So even if you're not trying to compare and contrast something, just throw 3 vocabulary words or images or keywords or topics or ideas. Throw 4 of them together and just let the kids marinate on it. They'll come up with some crazy ideas of which one is the odd one out. I've actually had someone say the shark because it's the only one that has its own week, Shark Week. I was like, oh my gosh, that's genius. I would have never even thought about that. But there's some other more obvious answers, like the polar bear is the only one that can actually live outside of the water. So I would let you guys do this with non-content first. Then I would go ahead and insert some content. So this slide is a great slide to stop and explore on. I'm not going to speak to all 4 of these strategies, but know that they're there. They're great discussion strategies. So if I partnered you guys up, I would have partner A maybe explore strategy 1 and 2, partner B explore strategy 3 and 4, and give you a couple of minutes just to explore these strategies on your own. Then when I would have you come back, share the strategies that you explored with each other, and you and your partner would start to talk about which one of these academic discourse strategies is the odd one out. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. Some people choose clothespin bumper cars because it's the only one that actually has a winner in the strategy. But yes, there's plenty more ideas on this slide of ways that you could get your kids talking. But that's another way that you could facilitate the odd one out, by actually putting content in there and giving them some resources to explore. So we're going to pause there, and there's actually 2 places for you to share out your ideas. You can share out your ideas as it pertains to odd one out, and then especially if you stopped and took some time to explore one of those other 4 strategies, share which one was your favorite and why. So post that under additional talking strategies. So there's 2 places for you to contribute to the conversation in this particular one. All right, I need to close out all my tic-tac-toes. Our last strategy is called Save the Last Word. So Save the Last Word is a really good structured protocol that is great for an exit ticket. So say you have a group of kids who are in a small group of 3. I would start and put you guys in a group of 3, and I would start by saying something like, write down the thing that resonated with you the most from today. And so I would give you a minute on your piece of paper, or I might give you a note card, a sticky note. On the front of your piece of paper, on the front of your note card, you would write what resonated the most with you today. If you were doing this in class, you could say what was the most important piece of information that you learned today. So I would give you a minute to write down one piece of information. On the back of your note card or your sticky note or your paper, you would write why. Why is that the most important part from today? Why did this particular thing resonate with you the most? And speak to your why on the back of your note card or your piece of paper. Then how the Save the Last Word protocol works is number the students off. So again, if we're in a group of 3, number each other off, 1, 2, 3. Person 1 reads the front of their note card. So they read, what was the most important point from this lesson? They do not say their why. Okay, they just read the front of their note card and say what they picked was the most important. Then partners 2 and 3 try to offer more to the conversation of why someone might say that is the most important point from the lesson. Person 1 gets the last word because they actually give their reason why after everyone else has had a turn to say why they think that might resonate with someone. So it's a great protocol because it provides good structure and good routine. It's always very clear which student is talking and never gets awkward until they finish the protocol. Then it would rotate to person 2. Person 2 would give their most important point. Person 3 and person 1 would try to guess why someone might say that's the most important point. Person 2 gets the last word because they finally say their why. Okay, so that is our last protocol. So go ahead one more time, share your ideas about the Save the Last Word strategy. It's very low prep. You don't need a lot of materials for it. You can just do it if you have 5 or 10 minutes at the end of class, but it is a great one to get kids talking. And so that brings us at the end of our time together. Thank you so much today for joining this webinar on demand. Hopefully you got some really good ideas about how to engage your students in academic discourse, get your students talking more. I am also, you can see me fumbling with my presentation right now because I realize my email address is not on here. So I'm also going to put my email address on here. Please feel free to reach out to me at any time if you have any questions. I'm always available. But thank you guys for joining the on-demand presentation today. We'll see you on the next one.